For CAF, the tourism sector is a very important sector. We are on the business of promoting inclusive growth in the region, and we truly believe that the tourism industry is key for that development in the near future. So again, thanks for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here once again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic horizon, the global economic horizon and the regional economic horizon, and then maybe a couple of minutes about Brazil. We are going to be talking about the global trends in 2025, the main risks, that there are a lot of them, the macroeconomic performance for Latin America and the Caribbean, a quick view on Brazil, as I was saying, and then a few final messages. For the global trends 2025, we identify three. The first one is a new, however, lower growth equilibrium for the world economy, inflation inertia, that's important, and third, policy uncertainty around the world. Going with the first, what we see here is that after the pandemic, the world economy is transitioning towards a long-term growth of slightly above 3%. This, of course, is much better than during the years of the pandemic, but it's lower than what we had before the pandemic. This is certainly not enough to lift people in poverty around the world. And the reason why there is a lot of heterogeneity in this global performance, with some regions growing more than others. The reason why the world is slowing down in terms of growth is because both engines of past growth, China and the US, are slowing down. In China, we are expecting growth of about 4.5%. In the US, we have a growth of 2.2%, but recently the World Bank came with a new set of projections, and for the World Bank, this number is closer to around 1.7%. So there is a lot of uncertainty about what the new policy set is going to do to the US growth in the near future. For the region, as we can see there, we have somewhat a recovery of growth this year. We are expecting Latin America and the Caribbean to grow 2.5%. This is better than last year, but it's not nearly enough to lift life conditions for the region on overall. Inflation inertia, as we can see in the graph, we have that the US inflation is coming up again. Expectations of US inflations are coming up. According to the Federal Reserve, the expectation for the next 12 months stand at 3.1%. For the next 3 years, stand at 3% a year. And this is considerably higher than the 2% goal for inflation. So it might be the case that the Federal Reserve decides to tighten monetary policy, increase interest rates in the future, to try to bring these inflation expectations down in line with the main objectives. That's not what the market is expecting right now, but the market is expecting inflation interest rates to come down, but slowly, but there is a risk that they could go up at some point if inflation expectations do not come back to lower levels. And then we have a lot of policy uncertainty coming up this year. This is an index about uncertainty. What we see there is that uncertainty now about policy decisions, economic policy decisions, is higher than after the Ukraine crisis, is at the same level than at the beginning of the pandemic. And this is record levels for the last 15 to 20 years. And of course, this uncertainty has a lot to do with the trade policy decisions that are being taken in the US and the reaction to those trade decisions all over the world. Of course, in Latin America, but mainly in China, Europe, and Canada. So again, those are the three main issues. And we have three risks as well: trade fragmentation, monetary policy tightening, and geopolitical uncertainty. In trade fragmentation, I'm not going to go into the detail, but what we have there is that there is, if we divide the world into geopolitical areas, we have a reduction in trade with, between political zones, geopolitical zones. We have, after the Ukraine war, a reduction in overall growth, but the reduction in trade between geopolitical blocs has been stronger than within geopolitical blocs. And this can be seen strongest in the relationship between the US and China. If we see the graph to the right, we see that in general, trade has been coming down after the Ukraine war, but it has been stronger. The coming down has been stronger between China and the US than between every one of those two and the rest of the world. So we have a geopolitical component to this trade issue, and the fact that the US is going forward with a different trade policy highlights the risks of trade fragmentation in the future. We have also the possibility of monetary policy tightening. We were talking about that before. It is true that since September of last year, the Federal Reserve has been bringing down inflation and interest rates as inflation was showing signs to reduce. But right now, it is the market consensus that interest rates will go down only by 25 basic points in the remaining of the year. It was a consensus just in December that it would go down by 75 basis points. What we see in the graph on the right is the expectations both of the Fed and the market, and the way we can interpret it is to see that even in the longer term, let's say 2026, 27, and long term, both market and the Fed are seeing a lower reduction of interest rates than in the past. So we are going to have higher cost of money for longer time than we were expecting just a few months ago. And finally, the geopolitical uncertainty, at least for the Latin American region, expresses itself in two different conditions. One is transportation and logistics costs, and we can see in both graphs that the container price index, even though it is not as high as it was during the pandemic, of course, or during the Gaza crisis, we see that it is still higher than it was between those two periods. So there has been an impact on transportation costs. And we also see some indicators about the restrictions to supply in terms of time to deliver goods, and restrictions to move those goods around. The other channel through which geopolitical uncertainty affects the region is through the price of commodities. And in that sense, what we are seeing now is mostly the reflection of what the world sees about the potential of a GDP contraction, a recession in the future. That's why we see prices of oil, the price of oil trending down currently, and expectations, and that's why we have seen a reduction in the price of some food stocks. But in general, this uncertainty plays towards an increase in commodity price in the future, and this might be at least for the Latin American region, positive things, given that most of our countries are commodity exporters. So sometimes what is bad in general for the world is not necessarily bad for the region. In terms of the regional performance, as we have seen, we have a slight rebound in growth. We are expecting a 2.5 growth rate this year. There is a lot of heterogeneity within countries in these projections. But I have to say that most of this recovery from 1.8 to 2.5 is related to the recovery in 3 countries. Of course, Argentina, that was having a really hard time last year. Ecuador, that has come through a difficult adjustment process with the IMF as well. And Colombia, that had a particularly bad year last year and is coming up back this year. So if we take out these 3 countries, the growth performance of the region is pretty much similar to what it was last year. In terms of inflation, well, progress in inflation and containment of inflation has been slowing down. The region was successful in bringing down inflation from very high levels. When I was in Lima last year delivering this presentation, I was much more optimistic because we were at the point in which we thought that we had beaten down inflation. But what we have seen in the last 12 months is that the last mile has been really difficult, and we have not seen further reduction in inflation in the region. Actually, we have seen a small uptick in recent months. And of course, there are heterogeneity within this dimension as well in the region, but this is proving to be really difficult to tackle down because in some countries, inflation expectations are not completely anchored. Because of that, there are fewer degrees of freedom for monetary policy in the region. What does that mean? That the central banks around the region don't feel as free to use monetary policy to help the economic recovery because they have to continue fighting inflation. And we see there that during last year, many of the main central banks of the region were able to reduce interest rates. And then in the last 6 months, what we see is that this trend has flattened out. Central banks are no longer able to continue reducing interest rates. And the strongest case is precisely the case of Brazil, where we have seen a significant reversal of this trend. Even last week, we had the Copom, the central bank of Brazil, deciding to increase considerably interest rates, again, to fight inflation in the country to a level that is similar to the maximum levels we saw after the pandemic. So this is one very strong example of the limitations that the central banks in the region are facing right now. And finally, there are some difficulties regarding fiscal consolidation that continues to be the challenge number 1 in the region in macroeconomic terms. As we can see in the graph, fiscal deficits continue to be very high in most of the regions. There has not been a significant, or at least as significant as we would have liked to see before, reduction in deficits. In some countries, actually, the fiscal deficit is coming up. Brazil is one of the cases. And because fiscal deficits are still considerably high, we see that the debt trajectory in some countries in the region continues to go up, and this is cause for some concern regarding the price of money in the future. If debt continues to go up, the cost of credit, not only for the public sector, but for everybody, will be higher in the future. This could constrain investment, and by constraining investment could also contain growth. So this is a challenge that the region needs to work more strongly in the future in order to secure growth in the long term. Now, turning to Brazil, very shortly, we see an economy that has been growing very significantly. 2024 was a very good year for Brazil. It had the strongest growth since the recovery of the pandemic. 3.4% for an economy the size of Brazil is very significant. It is very significant compared to the rest of the region. However, we see some, the market sees, and we as well, saw some signs of cooling down in the last quarter of the year. This cooling down has to be with smaller consumption, household consumption, because of higher interest rates, as we were saying before, and also a cooling down of investment because there is uncertainty about the fiscal policy and the trajectory of debt. As we were saying, Brazil is one of those cases where inflation has actually gone up in recent months. It is now at around 5% a year. This is outside the objective, the target band for the central bank. This is why the central bank is trying so hard to bring inflation down, because not only inflation is higher than the target, but expectations are above the target, and this is damaging the credibility of the central bank, something the central bank cannot allow to happen. So we see, in the case of Brazil, the central bank being very strongly committed to protect this credibility by maintaining high interest rates for as long as needed to bring inflation to the target. But the other side of the coin is that by having those high levels of interest rates in a country that borrows mostly domestic, this is the legacy from the crisis of the 80s. And this is very distinctive from Brazil regarding the rest of the region. The public debt in Brazil is about 90% domestic. Brazil has a huge financial system. It doesn't need to borrow much from abroad. It borrows domestically. But what it means is that when domestic interest rates go up, the cost of servicing that debt goes considerably up. And this is the case for the government. In the case of the public sector in Brazil, debt to GDP is high, and the combination of a high level of debt to GDP with high interest rates means that the public sector has to devote a considerable amount of resources just to servicing the debt. So there is going to be a lot of tension between the fiscal policy and the monetary policy just because of that. And finally, this combination of uncertainty about debt and the trade policy of the US that has targeted some areas that are particularly important for Brazil, like steel and aluminum. We have seen in recent months a depreciation of the exchange rate. There has been a correction in the last couple of months, but still we see the exchange rate more depreciated than it was during the last few years. So the exchange regime in Brazil has been able to serve as a buffer for this shock. And this is a good thing. This is a good thing because it allows for the economy to adjust instantly to those shocks. But of course, it also means that there could be some further impact on inflation in the next few months, or regarding to a more depreciated exchange rate. I'm not going to talk more about the perspectives for interest rates, but I'm just going to say that both the exchange rate depreciation and higher interest rates is what it is cooling down household consumption, and this explains a performance for the Brazilian economy that is slower than it was last year, and we expect, of course, more subdued growth for Brazil this year than the excellent year that the country had last year, without going into any recession. It is more some sort of a pause to maintain macroeconomic equilibrium. I still have some time, but I'm going to go forward with the last few key messages. The global economy is experiencing lower growth rates and risks of higher inflation. That's the main message I want to leave you today. Trade and monetary policy disruptions, as well as geopolitical risks, could affect the global outlook. So there is a lot of uncertainty. The region, Latin America and the Caribbean, will maintain somewhat better growth rates than in the past, but they are still low. And it has fewer degrees of freedom for the use of monetary and fiscal policy to try to expand that growth. A global slowdown scenario, it's not what we have right now as the main scenario, but it's a risk scenario, could negatively affect the region commodity export prices, and this could add up to the difficulties in terms of growth, in terms of external payments, and in terms of fiscal results. The fiscal results, the fiscal situation remains fragile, with high debt to GDP ratios in some economies, and servicing costs of debt are higher than in the past. So this is a restriction. And finally, a return to stable growth path will depend of the solution of some of the structural challenges facing the region, and finding some other engines of growth to stimulate economic activity. And I wouldn't want to leave you today with this group message, or because I want to devote one more minute to the tourism sector. Because it is true that the global economy is going through a difficult time. But the tourism sector is a GDP plus economic sector. Global growth might be 3%, but tourism is expected to grow by 9% this year. So there are difficult times for the GDP, for the global economic activity, but the future for tourism, even during those difficult times, is bright. And this is because this is a target spending that is highly valuable in most households around the world. And it is a spending item that is growing the most in the countries that are growing more quickly. So that's why the sector is particularly able to grow above what we expect for the world. But not only that, we also see that the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, has been overperforming finally in terms of growth rates, not in terms of levels, but in terms of growth rates, other regions in terms of tourism. Many of the best performers in terms of tourism last year and what is expected for this year are in this region. So this is also a good news. And that is mostly for two reasons. One, because people are diversifying into the kind of experiences they want to get out of their tourism money, and also because they are looking for value for its money spent. And maybe it is not such a bad thing that exchange rates in the region are depreciating slowly, as in the case in Brazil, because that makes the region a little bit more competitive. It gives the region a little bit of an edge that can help to increase its share in the global tourism sector that is already a sector with very high potential. Thank you again for allowing me to be here today, and I hope you have an excellent 2 days of work. Thank you.